As a football player, it's very rare that you get to pick your own retirement date. Whether through getting cut or getting injured, some things just aren't in your hands. This week, an entire team lost their jobs, including scholarship athletes, when the president and the athletic director announced that they would be discontinuing the program at Simon Fraser University. Well, today we've got Jim Mullin, president of Football Canada, on to talk about what happened, what they're doing about it, and what we can all do to help out going forward. Join us on the ride.
Of all the hashtags trending on Twitter this week, the one that Sheldon and I have been following is Save SFU Football. And for those of you that don't know, the Simon Fraser University football team has been scrapped by the athletic director and the administration after being uninvited for the 2024 season from the Lone Star Conference in the NCAA. The school decided to drop the program. And amidst much furor, members of the football community in Canada, led by the Alumni Association of the Simon Fraser University, have spoken up and have assembled to fight. Today, we've got Jim Mullin, president of Football Canada, long, rich history in the sport of football from a broadcast perspective, from coaching perspective, leading Football Canada, also on the International Association of American Football as one of the chancellors. Is that the
General Secretary? If they called me Secretary General, they'd have to give me one of those European military outfits with the hat with the scrambled eggs on the brim and stuff. So, you know, they flipped it around and I can just sit here wearing my Sonic shirt.
Well, Jim, speaking of hats, you wear many in the world of football, but this week the hat you wear most is Crusader. You come straight from the courthouse to the ride with Chevy and Nasty. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
No, thanks very much. And yeah, it's been quite a roller coaster over these last 10 days since the announcement came down. I got a hint of it from a number of pretty well-located sources inside SFU about 24 hours before the announcement came down. And
so can you give us a little timeline of sort of what happened and where we're at right now? Because there's a lot of people that, you know, this is flying under the radar for a lot of people. In the football world, it's not, but the general public might not know what has gone on here.
Hey, in the football world, it did too, because the actual announcement came out on the 4th of April. That would be the 2 Tuesdays ago. And, you know, on the weekend, Simon Fraser Football had a camp for high schoolers up on the hill. And they had then previous to that, they had their spring camp. There was no inkling that this program was going to be canceled. There was no consultation with the coaches, with the players, with the alumni, even within the staff. That this program was going to get shut down. And in this day and age where corporately or institutionally we need to communicate and consult, we do a ton of it at Football Canada in terms of trying to engage our stakeholders. This is shocking to me that this could come down out of a star chamber with such great silence and then just be dropped on these guys in the middle of exams. So Here they are talking about the value of the student and student athlete, and in some cases, some of these guys, and in case one girl that's on the team, were getting ready for exams like within an hour, 2 hours, and they're sitting in a theater with the athletic director and the VP academic telling them about their football program being canceled. The other thing, I was just going to say, the other thing that's really disappointing is that it came out in a press release. Come on.
Yeah. Well, now, has there been any transparency or any idea of what that decision process was? Because I'm curious to drop it that quickly. Is that something that had been percolating in the minds of the powers that be that for the last couple of seasons? Because that seems awfully sudden and awfully drastic just to drop a program.
In a word, no. So there was no inkling of any of this. I think there was a meeting back in December where the alumni may have been looking for assurances from the president, and she wasn't 100% there. But when you get into April, and you know what the situation of these student athletes are, you know that if they were to be released, say, April 4th, they'd go back into a market where 90% of the scholarship money available is already dried up. There isn't an opportunity there to, especially if you're economically disadvantaged, to move to another team, especially in Canada with the different limits they have versus a full ride that they have at the NCAA Division II level, to continue to go to school. Now, the school is offered, a full scholarship for a year, but that doesn't satisfy the athletic part of an athletic scholarship. So that was at the center of the injunction that came down today, that essentially it's a broken contract.
So now if we back up for a second, Jim, to be clear, and for listeners out there, they could have played this upcoming season, right? I guess the disinvite from the NCAA Lone Star Conference, which primarily plays Division II football out of Texas, they still had a home to play this upcoming season, correct?
1,000%. Yeah. 1,000%.
So this decision really, like you said, it really handicapped everyone, because these kids were expecting and training to play for a season. It's not like the conference said, hey, 2023, you're done. They had an opportunity to play. And just to unpack something else you said, in this day and age of, we talk so much about mental health, this comes down at a time that's a super stressful time in these kids' lives. But let's not forget, these kids have lived through 2 years of losing a football season during COVID already.
Mm-hmm. And they lost a number of home games too, due to COVID. If you were following along with Simon Fraser football last year, a number of these teams that were coming up from stateside would only come up to the border because of some of the travel restrictions that were in place at the time. So Simon Fraser played 3 of their home games, even though they've got a $20 million new stadium on the hill. They played 3 of their home games at Blaine High School, which is about 5 minutes over the border from White Rock. That was the scenario. Now, that created a bit of a distaste, I think, in the mouths of some of those traveling schools that were coming up from Texas and New Mexico, who were involved in the Lone Star Conference. And certainly Simon Fraser's performance was not very attractive to them. You play Simon Fraser, you have to beat them by 50 points to move up in D2 ratings. So when the administration gave the ability for the Lone Star Conference to say, hey, we're going to break your contract now with a year left in it, I think the commissioner of the Lone Star Conference has taken advantage of that. And says, we're moving on now. Now, this court action, this court injunction, will compel Simon Fraser to go back to the Lone Star Conference and say, hey, we had a contract here, even though we told you that we've broken it off. What can we do to facilitate this? At this stage right now, it's hard for a lot of those LSC teams to fill those dates that they have. It's hard to find other dance partners out there to create a non-conference game in their schedule.
So that ship hasn't sailed yet, because my understanding was that the conference itself was quite upset with this decision by Simon Fraser University as well, because that is going to throw off everything. They've got 5 months to put this together. Well, is it still an option for them to go back and play?
I believe that the university has to explore that option now, given where we're at. But first of all, the university needs to have a thoughtful dialogue with stakeholders here as this thing comes back online after this court action, and we'll see if they do, or we'll see if they try to kick the can and run out time on this. I will say.
So what exactly does that injunction? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Well, what exactly does that injunction do then? Because is that basically kind of like reset the decision and the courts forcing them to go back and and fulfill the contract? Like, what does this injunction mean, and what kind of power does it have?
It resets the status quo. This is used in bankruptcy procedures at times, right? So this is a breach of contract. You have 5 players saying, "Hey, Simon Fraser, you've attracted us to this school through your recruiting. We're ready to make a 4-year commitment to get an education and train in football to perhaps have a professional outcome. By not giving us a proper heads up or a proper lead in on this, which is really obvious, you have broken that contract with us. You are taking away opportunity from us rather than providing the opportunity that is within the athletic scholarship contract that they have." So that was the premise moving forward, and with the 5 players, it goes all the way from freshman to senior, and there's one American player also that's filed in the injunction. There's a hearing set for May the 3rd. I think between now and May the 3rd, it's time to sit down and actually start moving this thing forward, reset the team, get back to working on that. But we'll see. Right now, the president of Simon Fraser, she's the one responsible for this decision, is on vacation in Mexico, and we haven't heard much from her. This is an opportunity for an administration that has made a rather large mistake to step back, be adult, own it, and then move forward again. Give them the opportunity to get through 2023 and come up with an alternate plan. We've seen this before in the conference that Simon Fraser played in, actually, when it was the Great Northwest Conference, before they were with the Lone Star Conference. Humboldt State, I believe it was in 2017, was told in December of the year before, 2017, that the program was getting shut down, that there wasn't stable funding, that there wasn't the proper structure to move forward with confidence into the future, but they would give them a year. And they gave them a year. And by the time they got into October, it was apparent that the alumni could not make this thing work. They announced with 4 games remaining that it was the end of the season. Guys got their tape. Guys got to play out the rest of the season. They had enough ramp-up time that they could make alternate arrangements with other teams. That's the way you do this, right? Yeah. So what's being pumped out there by the AD at Simon Fraser about giving athletes an option? Either she doesn't know anything about the football calendar, or it's completely insincere.
Unbelievable.
Well, and it does seem that, I mean, without making a personal attack, it would seem that someone in that position would understand the ramifications of such a decision, not just on the athletes and the families in Simon Fraser, but you're creating upheaval in a whole conference. Like, you just don't do that in sport. I mean, all these teams that have arranged travel schedules, that all has to be undone and redone. And now, if they have an opportunity to re-enter the conference, maybe they do. But I gotta assume there's a lot of scrambling on all ends, and it really falls on the AD and the president's decision to do this so late. I think about the athletes. I think about the players that have invested their time in Simon Fraser. Many of these players have said no. When they went to Simon Fraser, they've said no to the schools that they will now be begging for an opportunity. Mm-hmm. They don't show up and become a starter on that team. They become a guy that maybe fits in if the team, every team's going to take some guys that are good quality players and add them as depth. But no captain of the team is Simon Fraser, no fifth-year guy that played 5 years or 4 years, whatever they do. No one's showing up on another team and becoming the man. And if they have 1-2 years left of eligibility, that really messes up any chances they might have had in terms of playing professional football if that was their goal. And really short-sighted, because again, you always think that they would put the student athlete first, and the student athlete experience is the totality, like you said. Just giving them a scholarship for academics, that's great. But you know what? That's not what they signed up for. Mm-hmm. They signed up to be a student athlete. And sometimes you take away the athlete part from the student, they're not as good a student. I know for my case, I was a much better student because I played football. because I was scheduled, because I had something that I worked for. I was fulfilled on very many ends. Those kids are going to get depressed if they wind up staying there and there's no football. There's no doubt in my mind. And then when we talk about that athletic director and the comments made, and again, I want you to speak on this more as I bring it up, because again, there's a lot of people that are unfamiliar with the situation. I'm sure some people that don't know the situation say, well, what about trying to move to U Sports, the Canadian University football system? And her comments were to the effect that, well, that would be a very complex process to apply for, and almost like she just threw it away without even doing. And that's what you're supposed to do when you're a leader.
Well, the
you're
athletic
supposed to do
director
hard
is supposed
things.
to be the director of the athletic program, right?
It's about navigating. It's about navigating a difficult situation. And, regardless of whether or not it was incredibly complex, I do know these U Sports policies kind of back and forth when they were brought in to prevent teams from and programs cherry picking if they were in the NCAA, saying we want some of our programs over here in U Sport and some of these other programs here in the NCAA. I understand the rationale behind it, but with the discussions that I've had kind of offline, there is an indication that you can actually apply to the Canada West in this case and ask for an exception. Then, as an AD, you navigate that. You navigate that exception, and then when that's accepted, then you move it up to the U Sports level, and it's dealt with at the board level there. The impression that I get from people in U Sport and the people in Canada West out here is no one wants to see a football program fold. Period. Right. Doesn't matter if they're playing in the NCAA. Doesn't matter if they're playing. They don't want to see one fold. So, the other thing that's disconcerting about this is that when the athletic director and the vice president academic made their presentation to the players 30 minutes after the announcement, the VP academic, Wade Parkhouse, was asked by the players, when did you make this decision? And he said, well, 2 weeks ago. Well, there was a spring camp happening then, first of all, so they had made their mind up during spring camp. But the other thing is that it times out in a way where this was after the AD had approached U Sports, the NAIA as well, and Canada West. The decision was already made. That's why it's insincere to suggest that they were looking at that as a path. Even the managing director of Canada West said he felt like they were checking off a box. So this is one of the reasons why there's a desire for some action to be taken here, because let's get back to some sincere dialogue about what do we do with this program, right? What do we do on a campus that 25% of your athletes are football players, and half of them are BIPOC, and half of your coaching staff is BIPOC, right? And if you are committed to diversity and inclusion, you are committed to this football team. If you have the opportunity tonight to see the reports on CBC National, CTV National News, like we did a really good hit through the media today, both nationally and regionally. The press conference actually got picked up on BC One, which is a BC-based news network, live for half an hour. This is a story that's really taken off here, and I'm even a little bit surprised at it. But when you look at that cross-section of players, it's everybody. It's every demographic.
The thing there too, though, we talk about the diversity in football. That also includes the guys like me, like the small-town northern Saskatchewan kids that grew up on a farm. It was football that brought me and introduced me to all these different people, all these different cultures. I went the American route, and that gave me every opportunity to grow as a person and to understand the world better. This is just taking away an avenue to bring players from all over Canada and North America together, and in the interest of just pure sport. But my concern here is, and I'm wondering, like, this wasn't a purely business financial decision by the school. Is it? Like, I fear that there's an attack against football in general. An aggressive...
In the press release, it said it's not about the money. When staff were presenting to the team and in other dialogue, they've insisted it's not about the money. So let's clear this up once and for all. It's not about the money. They had a place to play in 2023. Why aren't they playing in 2023?
Let me ask you this question, Jim. Let me ask you this question. You said, and you said some very powerful stuff there. You said no football team in Canada, no university football team wants to see a program fold. The flip side to it is there must be a narrative out there that people want to see football die. You're the president of Football Canada. You're involved in football internationally. You've been involved in the game for over 30 years, maybe more, on all levels. Is that what you're seeing? That maybe there's this, maybe it was a silent minority and now it's becoming more vocal, maybe a little bit more power in places where, football can't touch and people can make these decisions because it's not about the money. They want football to die. As Sheldon said, football's under attack. But is there an agenda right now? Even though we talk about football as being a very inclusive environment. In fact, I think you mentioned that there's even a female on the team, and I would venture to guess that's the only female playing college football in North America. Maybe there might be one or two.
There's two. There's one at Vanderbilt, and then there's Christy Elliott, who actually played on our national women's team as well. She's a place kicker.
So that's amazing.
Take a point in an NCAA game.
And that's amazing. That's historic, right? But maybe it's not enough. At the risk of, it's not enough diversity for some. But is that an excuse to get rid of a program that offers so much opportunity, as you mentioned, for many people of diverse backgrounds and diverse interests coming together for, I believe, a common good? Like, do you hear that maybe there are some voices that just want football to die altogether? Is that what's going on here?
I think those voices have always existed in one way or another, quite frankly. I think the other thing that, one of the things that I posted out on Twitter is that it's okay for Simon Fraser to try to be elite. It's another thing when you make decisions that are elitist. And when I take a look at the cross-section of those players, and this seems to be lost in a lot of the diversity conversations, in my mind at least, it's economics. There are guys that are on that team that have scholarships that would otherwise not be going to university.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not going to name them, but there are pockets of that all across North America. And if you are not giving an economic hand up for these individuals, they're not getting necessarily to the next level in life. And if you are not bringing those types of individuals into a campus and into a campus community, you're creating an elitist society, right? You're not creating I worked at Simon Fraser back in the 1990s and attended there. I managed a campus radio station of all things, and then was their SID for a year. And the one thing about managing a campus radio station when you're cross-sectioning media and people all over the place, you're accommodating people from all types and all kinds. And athletics is a part of that mosaic on a campus. And if you start eliminating parts, if you start pulling away at the threads and the strings, right, and you make it all about one thing rather than about the many, you've lost the point of what a campus community is and how that's supposed to incubate thought and conflict and great ideas and maybe some not so great ideas too, but that's where you put it to the test before you move on and become an adult, in my mind. And this one little situation here is part of something bigger, if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I do believe that there's some sort of movement on that side. But you said something so poignant there that, these kids, some of them might not have otherwise had an opportunity, but that's been football from when these kids start in Timbits.
Yeah.
Football has always been, I've coached at the community level. Sheldon has coached at the community level. Football has always been one of the most inclusive sports. To play at a community level, you just have to show up all community teams provide the equipment, provide the helmets, the pads, everything. All you got to do is show up with a water bottle, and in many cases, you don't even have to pay registration because a lot of community teams subsidize that. And it's one of the lowest cost sports to participate in Canada. Many of these kids can't play hockey. Soccer is ridiculously expensive for a sport that just requires a ball. Yeah. And I know personally, my journey through football and some of the people I played with was exactly that. Given an opportunity to play a sport, otherwise they wouldn't have had that opportunity because we are an elitist society. Canada, any sport that you try to be at the highest level at, you have to have money and you have to have opportunity. Football is the one sport you could show up as an 18-year-old, as long as you're willing to work hard, run fast, and smack someone, you can get a chance to get a scholarship, you can get a chance to go professional and actually make a career of it. It's the only sport. Every other sport out there has a system that's almost impossible to navigate if you're not elite from the age of 5. You're talking about hockey, you're talking about baseball, you're talking about soccer, figure skating, swimming. Any of those sports don't offer the opportunity equally that football would give. Now, granted, I understand that football is a male-dominated environment. And there's some people that will point figures at that and say, well, it only gives opportunities to males. Well, yes, that's historically been true. But I think, when we look at what the CFL is doing in terms of giving opportunities to women in sport, we're looking at, like you said, Simon Fraser has a female athlete. Yes, we're at the beginning of that. There are many leagues, as you can probably expand on, that offer opportunities for females to participate. It's not the dark ages anymore. It's not where it needs to be, but eliminating football because, you know what, it's a male-dominated environment that maybe only gives opportunities to males is not the right reason to can a program and eliminate those opportunities that those young men and their families work for their entire life.
Yeah, it's part of what I call the football ecosystem in Canada. We're not the big three pillars like they are in the United States of high school, college, and pro, where if there's a little chip off that pillar, if one team leaves, it's not fatal. Here, if we have a couple of pieces that are pulled out, it's going to hurt. So we all have to take care of each other across this country. I want to touch a little bit on the women's football piece quickly on two parts. We've always had in Football Canada our top level of tournament is the Canada Cup for U18s, right? We've built out something for the women. It's really compelling this year where we have a group led by Indigenous leaders called Indigenous Team Canada. It's a girls' team that is going to compete equally like one of the provinces for a national championship. And this is where it's starting with girls' football. It's not starting with boys' football, right? And it will eventually branch out into Indigenous communities and have a Canadian representative team. I'm so proud of these guys. Another point, our registration for Football Canada in the lowest 5 percentile of any of the NSOs out there, the national sports organizations. We as a sport bend over backwards to make it economically accessible. And I feel that's extremely important, for future engagement. Does it disable what we can do as an organization? Of course it does. Like, we're always watching pennies and nickels and dimes when it comes to budgeting, and it's because we make that choice. But it's a choice that is aligned with the values of the game, right? And then the other piece to this, and it's going to be a culture changer for our sport, and this, I'm kind of putting my IFAF hat on here right now. We are working so hard to get this sport into the Olympic Games as flag football. And flag football provides opportunities for men, but it provides a whole lot of opportunities for women. So I've started the discussion with U Sports right now, and this is partly as a kind of a backstop for the 27 teams that we have in U Sports, is how do we get women's flag football as a varsity sport? And there's interest in making it a P2 sport where Football Canada could run a national championship. And it's important because I'm not sure if your listeners must know about Title IX in the United States, where you have an equal number of
Yes.
female opportunities to male opportunities. What we want to do is, within regions, create an equal number of female opportunities playing for a national championship for women's flag as exists in that region on a tackle roster for men's tackle football. So, for instance, if UBC is in Vancouver, you get UBC, UVic, Trinity Western, Fraser Valley, they're all going to put teams together, right? Those are equal numbers to what UBC puts on the field with the men's team. We can achieve gender balance with that, right? We need to have strategies that are inclusive and gender balanced, but at the same time, we need to ensure that tackle football for men, especially at that university level, which is the history of the game in this country, thrives and survives. So that's part of a broader strategy. You know, we asked SFU last year if they wanted, we started a women's collegiate flag final. The teams in Quebec are organized. There's an actual university league of flag football for women out there. No response from Simon Fraser. So take that for
now,
what you want.
has that been tried anywhere else? Like with Title IX in the States, is the NCAA adopting a model like that as well, bringing on women's flag football at the collegiate level?
The NAIA is offering scholarships now.
Fascinating.
The NCAA, a couple of the Power Five conferences reached out to my counterpart with USA Football, and they're in open discussions now about how can we bring women's flag football on as a varsity sport. And I don't think it was lost on anyone, what happened at the Pro Bowl this past year. Part of that is the future, and it's part of a larger strategy. So, Chevy, when did you start playing ball? How old were you?
I started playing, I was 19 years old.
19 years old. There you go. You're a late adopter, right? What we need to do to make football healthier in this country in terms of numbers is get kids playing flag football at 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, right?
Yep.
And then developing their skill set so families can make the decision in around the age of 12 or 13 whether or not they want to play tackle football, flag football, or both, or maybe put off tackle for another couple of years. But if you start at that earlier age with something that's so accessible, right? That's the opportunity to get kids to play, I think, in the long term, and make all of our associations that we have across the country healthier. And it's starting to show, actually, because our registration numbers this year are equal to 2016. We are bouncing back in a hurry right now.
Well, that's great. And that infrastructure, we're here in Calgary, is starting to grow in Calgary. I know we had my old teammate, we had him on the show, Keon Raymond. He's a big proponent, big champion for the 7-on-7 type football, the non-contact football, and those skills translate. And that's exactly it. Like you said, kids can have the option, and it's growing here. The infrastructure is growing. Obviously in Quebec, football is, I believe it's the number one participation sport right now because it's accessible more than any other sport. And I love where this is going. We've got Jim Mullin on the show with us today, president of Football Canada. He's the crusader for the Save SFU Football movement that's going on now to basically reverse the decision that Simon Fraser University dropped their football team and really left a whole bunch of young athletes stranded and their families. So we're hoping it goes forward, but I want to turn this a little bit positive. I could have gone negative with some of the things I read online, but if we turn this positive, someone said this to me once. They said, when soccer wants something done, they do such a good job of mobilizing together. They want a field built, they get it built, or the city builds a field and soccer manages to scoop it out from anyone. And football has always been fragmented. It's always a lot of egos, a lot of guys that have played football. I don't get along with him. I don't get along with him. How has this galvanized the football community, and who are some of the people that's brought together? Like, I've seen some of the names, but I want you to kind of describe the involvement. The Farhan Laljis, the Amar Dolmans, the Randy Ambrosies. Like, tell us a little bit about how this has galvanized football from your perspective, someone that lives it and breathes it every day.
Well, when I first came to the Board of Football Canada, my number one complaint was how siloed the football culture was in this country. It's exactly the way you described it. whether it's the CJFL hating the university guys, whether it's the University of Alberta calling the University of Calgary bad names, whether you just go down the list right down to community ball versus high school ball. You get some of the silliest, most infantile arguments and disagreements from a distance between these groups, right? I posted earlier a few days ago that I'd actually had never felt so good about the sport in this country because of what was happening here. Like, Randy and I have had our disagreements, like some pretty serious disagreements. We are right on the same page with this. I had to zip him a note just expressing my thanks for the way he's taken a leadership position on this, and did it very, very thoughtfully through the CFL office communicating to U Sports. So you've got the CFL, you got Brian Ramsey in the PA. They're doing some background right now, and they have good connections into the government in BC, and they're working those channels right now. The CJFL conference out here in BC, first to step up and announce that they would put a moratorium on announcing any transfers into junior football from SFU. The Canadian University coaches, all the U Sports coaches, a day later agreed to that. And I got breaking news here. Breaking news. That the Canadian University coaches that run the East-West Bowl for U Sports have opened up 3 invitations for SFU players to go there and play in May. I reached out to Steph Patazik, who's running that, and Mike Falds, who's the chair of Kufka. They got that thing turned around in 24 hours. And I mentioned to Mike, I said, hey, I'm all in with the SFU piece right now. I'm actually kind of a UBC guy myself, but I'm all in on the SFU piece right now. And I said, hey, Mike, if it was you or any of the other 27 teams, I'd be there in the same way, because that's how important I think these university teams are for us in the amateur game. They're the top of the ecosystem for us. They're what deliver them on beyond and outside of our system. So we've got Amar Doman stepping up in a big way right now with messaging. I think there are other ways that people can't see that he's helping to create change with other leaders in the Vancouver business community. Right across the board, everybody's in on this, and it's not just in BC, it's national. Like, this is a moment right now where we're reminding ourselves that Canadian football is a sport, but it's also a culture, and it's also a community. I mean, people can overuse those terms so much, but it's being redefined right here. And it's out there, especially on social media, for everyone to see. And for that reason, it's a fantastic moment. And I also think that for the athletes on this SFU team, we had about 25 of them at the presser today, they actually couldn't believe the feedback that they were getting from all parts of the country on this. And after we closed off the presser, like, they're all hanging around together for about another hour. They wouldn't leave, right? There's a real feeling of togetherness here. Like, the communication that I've got back from the players in terms of jumping and moving teams, there's only one guy that really wants to go, and like every year there's a guy that wants to go on your team. It's not because of this. Everybody's kind of in a holding pattern and holding off, even though probably there's more than a few athletes having some quiet conversations with coaches, but nobody's announcing anything. Nobody's breaking ranks right now, and that's really good.
So what do you to the guys like Chevy and I, guys that changed our lives, made our livings playing this great Canadian game, through to amateur coaches and fans around the country. Is there anything that us as just fans of the game can do to make sure that this is front and center and prominent? What's the biggest need out there, not just with SFU, but to make sure that the lesson here is learned and that we galvanize behind this great Canadian game? What can the average person that cares do right now?
Well, it's funny. I said to some of the players in a restaurant afterwards, they're all saying, thank you for this, thank you for that. I said, this is the first step of 20. right?
Yeah.
And so, Shell, you're right to identify, like, what do we do? That is the next step. What do you do? And in some cases, it's as simple, especially for CFL fans. It's as simple as saying, I'm going to get out to one U Sports game this year. Or if there's a junior team in your backyard, I'm going to go out and see the Calgary Colts this year. Or I'm going to see the Regina Thunder this year. There was a time when the Regina Rams would draw 7,000 a game when they're at the top of their game playing junior football. And the times that I announced Canada West over about 15 years, they're lucky to get about 2,500 a game. They deserve better than that. They got 16,000 when they did the test opening of the stadium for them and the Huskies, but people weren't there even watching the game. They were there to see the stadium, right? So it's we know about college football. It's a compelling game. It's not professional football. It's different. There's mistakes made, but sometimes those mistakes lead to fantastic outcomes, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes those broken coverages lead to crazy situations, right? So if I'm suggesting anything to CFL fan or NFL fan out there, get out, see one college game or see one junior game in your community this year. Because I know there's a lot of folks out there that are ticket buying folks that just don't do that. So just try it once.
And that's great advice. I mean, like, I think even with my own kids, I took them to a game when they were like 7 and 4 just to go hang out and eat cheap hot dogs and enjoy. But yeah, we don't take advantage of that often enough. Even talking to, we had Michael Ball on a couple of weeks ago, talking with Connor Bedard. That stadium was empty until as the season's coming to an end and people start appreciating really what we have there to go out and support amateur hockey. We've got to do the same thing in football, because a lot of these guys we're going to see as the next great Canadian receiver, the part of the Canadian Air Force with the Riders, or defensive tackle or whatever. There's some great players coming up through the ranks. And personally, that's the only thing that keeps me watching the CFL today, is to see these Canadian guys telling their Canadian stories coming from towns that I know and watching a small town kid do good.
Well, and in some cases, depending on how the numbers game works, you might see some guys that are fantastic college players that you will not have the opportunity to see in the professional ranks. If I want to jump in the Wayback Machine, I'll use Chris Flynn as an example of that. Like in terms, and there's been others. There's been a long string of others in different positions where the trend in the numbers game on the field haven't necessarily lined up with with those guys' talents, depending on what their skill set is. So, like, the one thing I like so much about the Canadian University game is you got 4 conferences, you got geographic separation, but you, as opposed to the CFL, where there is a lot of player turnover and in some cases coaching turnover, not as much these days. When you look at the offensive sets in Canadian college ball right now, they are way more diverse than the Canadian Football League. You get all kinds of different looks, depending where you have the opportunity to look in. The issue is, I get to see all of the video from across the country because I put a TV show together on it. Our biggest problem is that unless you're in Quebec, where TVA has not just one game of the week, but in some cases 3 games of the week on TV, it's really hard to find a game. So, our leadership when it comes to U Sports and these conferences need to be more inventive to try to find ways to highlight one game on TV so people catch it, have that collision, and then get pulled into the online model so people can actually follow the game. But as a starting point right now, because that TV stuff ain't there, just get out to a game.
Buy a ticket.
Yeah.
Jim, you have your plate full. Not only are you trying to grow football on the participation levels across Canada, you're trying to grow interest in Canadian football, and now you're trying to save a football franchise. What is next for you in all 3 of those spots? Give us a quick rundown in saving your franchise, growing participation, and growing fan appreciation of the game?
Well, I thought you were leading to a place where I could say I could just get some sleep. Hit me up one at a time, and I'll tell you what we're attempting to do.
Okay, participation in the game across Canada.
Participation in the game across Canada. A lot of the stuff that I talked about, flag, trying to drive things down to a younger age, making communities that have been driven by 12-man football not afraid to work with 9-man football or 6-man football, so guys can still put on the pads, and then you can grow your game as your numbers grow. Right, that will keep your program going on the tackle side if your numbers happen to dip, because across the country we've got growth in a lot of areas, but in other areas it's dropped off. It's really uneven. There's not a real unified national story here. But flag, I'd love to have a partner that could come on and help us with our first down program. Our first down program is like Timbits hockey. They have it in Saskatchewan, and it's working well. The Tykes on Spikes program, it's the same program. But to be able to just introduce kids to picking up a football, running around with it, running around a cone, that 4 to 7 age set for about 45 minutes. Not only is it important for football, but when I talk to friends of mine who are teachers in elementary school, they give me the feedback that, hey, there's kids in grade 3 that can't throw a baseball these days. Yeah. Like that, there's a part of the new generation coming up that's lost physical literacy. Yeah. So we need to hit on that, and we need to hit on that hard, right? This is one of the avenues for that to get more kids playing the game.
Okay, next one. Football is a very popular sport. You talked about NFL fans, CFL fans. As much as we hate, it pains us, and Shell and I, we've had debates with people on this show. How do we grow fans of the Canadian football game? And is that a Football Canada responsibility? Is that a CFL responsibility? Who has to drive that bus? Because we need more fans in CFL stadiums, which will, basically permeate down to the participation and the fandom at the younger ages. Who drives that bus?
It's a football ecosystem responsibility. And what I mean by that is, this gets back to the silo piece again. There needs to be more consistent and regular engagement between the CFL, between U Sports, between the CJFL, and us at Football Canada. In fact, we have the opportunity with some of our national teams, I think, to create something special in the future. We were kind of knocked back on our heels through COVID. We got a world championship up in Edmonton for our world junior teams. We are the 2-time defending world champions, by the way, back to back.
Wow.
One in 2018 in front of 30,000 fans in Mexico City. Beat Mexico there. 2 years previous to that, beat the United States. And as a matter of fact, we're the only 3-time champion of the World Junior Championship. The Americans have only won 2 of them. Americans always like to complain, by the way, that they don't get to send their best players. We don't either. We don't either. Did we have Chuba Hubbard in the backfield for those kids? We had the Philpotts, but we certainly didn't have Chuba, right? So does in terms of building it, and in terms of creating more visibility, I was always someone who was opposed to the CFL moving the start of their season back and moving the end of their season up, so it was kind of up against the World Series. I'm not that way anymore because I mapped it out, and you know what? If the CFL ended in the first week of November, you could have a very special 8-team playoff nationally at the university level, just pick up where the Grey Cup leaves off, where you've got a literal Canadian bowl season that leads into the American bowl season, right? Yeah. 4 weeks of just fantastic Canadian university football. Some of it won't be so fantastic. We've seen some pretty bad blowouts over the years, but I was the guy that that was the managing director in Vancouver for the 2011 Vanier Cup. And if you guys remember that game, I was lucky enough to manage it, but I was also lucky enough to call it on radio.
Is that
At the
McMaster
same
Laval?
time. Yeah, that was Laval and McMaster in overtime.
Tyler Carpinga.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, man, that may have been, when I take a look at the most exciting Canadian games or games of any sort that I've ever seen or been a part of, it's number one, baby. It's number one, and I've been to 17 Grey Cups, man. That is easily number one. Maybe it's because I was so invested in it. Maybe because we got a lower bowl sellout at that game. Maybe because a whole lot of people watch it on TV. That's kind of where we've got to go. I think people bug the CFL about marketing, but they do have infrastructure and they do have marketing power. So if the Grey Cup is on the first weekend in November, those places where there's CFL teams can have partnerships with universities where they can create that marketing power to basically extend the Canadian football season by a month. I think an extra month of Canadian football is pretty fantastic. You had a third point, did you? I think I may have talked your ear off.
My third point, Sheldon. Let me finish my third point. I'll give you the last word, Sheldon, because I always talk too much. But my last question is: we brought you in to talk about Simon Fraser University program and it being dropped. The current status is there is no football team. What is next?
What is next is hopefully some thoughtful dialogue between the alumni, the stakeholders, and the university that prompts them to actually put an application into the Canada West for membership. One of the things that I pointed out at the presser today when people were focused on being in a conference or whether or not they could play in the Lone Star Conference is also outreach to teams in Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada, because you can play as an independent without any sanctioning from anyone in Canada. So if the Western Mustangs have a week off and they want a game and Simon Fraser wants a game, the Western Mustangs don't have to ask the OUA and they don't have to ask U Sports. They can just schedule the game, right? They have that level of autonomy. So if we know every week for Simon Fraser football, there's at least 3 Canadian teams available, they've got a schedule. They've got a way to play in 2023. So no matter the rhetoric around it, let's cut through the BS on this. You got a place to play. It's not about the money. Let's go in that direction, and then let's continue the discussion and continue the process, even if it may be incredibly complex for some, and find a way to make this work.
Well, that's it, Jim. I mean, I really appreciate you coming on the show and giving us your insights on this. I think that my biggest takeaway right now is I've got a couple of young Pee-wee Calgary Mavericks staying over at my house tonight. We're talking about the diversity of the game.
Yeah.
The defensive player of the year for the Pee-wee Mavericks and the second leading tackler was a female. And I think for my job now as a guy who hasn't played football in 10 years or more, I just want to make sure that there's opportunities for my kids and their teammates down the road to have the same experience that I had. So, guys, it starts with us. The number one thing we can do is get out there and support amateur football. Buy a ticket to one game, bring your kids, and enjoy a great afternoon watching a great game. So, Jim, I guess just once again, thanks so much for joining us on the show. You've been a huge warrior for the Canadian game. And this is also a challenge going out to all the other coaches and alumni and guys that have, benefited from the game. Guys, let's do our part.
Thanks very much, guys. Appreciate being on.
Wow, Sheldon, that was amazing. Having Jim on, we didn't just talk about the death and maybe resuscitation of the Simon Fraser football program. We talked about the health of football across Canada. What'd you think?
I mean, there's just so much to unpack there. Like, as a former player, to be perfectly honest, when I'd left the league, I stopped watching. I had season tickets for a couple of years, but I didn't want to watch. I wanted to play, and if I wasn't playing, I wasn't interested. But as you get a little bit older, like even tonight at my house, I have a couple of the, like I said, a couple of Pee Wee Mavericks staying over at our house tonight. Football was my opportunity to get out of a small northern Saskatchewan town and experience the world. And it opened up a lot of doors for me. And now when I look at the kids downstairs, I just want to make sure that they have as many opportunities, just like I had, to go and pursue it. And it's such a slippery slope. If we start losing football programs, or if we let academia or academic institutions not value the opportunity that this is giving young Canadian kids, we're going to lose the battle. So back to what Jim said. You know what can I do this year? Buy a ticket, and I already know which game I'm going to go to. My buddy, I think we've talked about him before on the show. My old teammate with the North Battleford Vikings. His son is now a Saskatoon Hilltopper. Yeah. You better believe they're not coming to Calgary, but I'm going to go up to Edmonton and go visit him, buy a ticket to a game, and make sure I check out sure I check out a Dinos game here as well. If everybody buys one ticket, bring your kids, buy a hot dog, and just make sure that we're growing this sport.
Yeah, you talked about accessibility. It's not just accessible for the players to get in. It's also accessible for the fans. And, across the country, if people made that decision to support local football, I mean, the opportunities that it affords, especially tackle football, primarily young men, I wouldn't be the person I am if it weren't for football. If I didn't find football at the age of 19 and it focused me, it focused my resolve to do something more than just bumming around with my buddies. Football really changed my life. And it changed the lives of many people that I know. And it's not for everyone, but it's important for many. And Jim, thanks to Jim Mullin, President of Football Canada, for coming on. Thanks to all of you for listening to The Ride. We'll be back soon.